It was a Tuesday, one of those blistering July afternoons when the air itself felt thick enough to swim through. I was just finishing up a job on the west side of town, thinking about a cold drink, when my dispatcher buzzed me with another call. A busted AC unit in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside Philly. It sounded like a simple, routine fix, so I punched the address into my GPS and headed over. The house belonged to a woman named Eleanor. I didn't know anything about her, other than her name on the work order. I figured it would be an in-and-out job, an hour at most. To me, she was just another client, another stop on a long, hot day. That was it. Nothing more to it. So when I rang the bell, I expected a quick greeting and to be pointed toward the thermostat. But when she opened the door, the stillness of the house seemed to rush out to meet me. She was a woman who might have been in her early 50s, with a fragile look in her eyes that didn't quite match her welcoming smile. She appeared a little surprised to see me, as if she'd forgotten she'd called. I felt a strange need to look away, so my eyes darted toward the wilting ferns on her porch. "Hi, Cole," she said, her voice softer than I expected. I was beginning to wonder if anyone was coming. "Please, come in." I offered a professional nod and stepped inside, holding my toolbox. "Just trying to beat the heat," I replied, making a weak attempt at small talk. "I understand the AC is giving you trouble." She let out a small, weary sigh and gestured down the hallway. "Oh, it's not giving me trouble," she said with a hint of melancholy. "It's given up entirely. Can I get you something cold to drink before you start?" I hesitated for a moment, wanting to just get the job done, but I accepted the offer of water. It wasn't like she was a complete stranger, just a client, but something about the quiet intensity of her home felt different. I'd always been able to maintain a professional distance, but I never imagined feeling this sort of strange, quiet sadness from a place. We stood in her kitchen, and she poured me a glass of ice water. At first, the conversation was light, about the relentless heat wave, but as I started diagnosing the AC unit, I realized she was sharing things in a way most clients didn't. She spoke about how the days blended together, how her son, Marcus, had moved across the country, and how utterly silent the house was most of the time. For a few minutes, I didn't feel like I was just the AC guy. It was just the two of us, sharing a moment of unexpected candor in her cool, dim living room. And the way she watched me work, it wasn't just idle curiosity. It was as if she was soaking in the simple presence of another person. That's when my perception of the job began to warp. I started to see her differently. There was a profound loneliness there. Something more than just an empty nester. Then she gave a faint, almost wistful smile. "You're so capable, Cole," she said. "It's been so long since I've had a man around the house who knows how to fix things." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just offered a slight shrug and focused on the wiring. A new kind of energy was building between us, something unspoken but undeniably present. I could feel it, a quiet hum of desperation, but I was unsure what it meant. I knew I needed to finish up and leave. She moved back to the kitchen, and I kept working. As she passed by, I caught a faint scent of lavender, something clean and domestic. And for a brief second, she wasn't just a client. She was a woman, an individual with her own story and her own deep-seated needs. "Thank you for coming out so quickly," she added, turning back to face me from the doorway. "I really needed someone here today." I gave her a small, tight smile, feeling a strange mix of pity and discomfort in my chest. "Anytime," I said automatically, already packing my tools. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this visit had gone off script. Something unsaid had taken root, and I was anxious to see where it would lead. The next time I saw Eleanor was about an hour later, because I was still there. I was running diagnostics when she came to stand in the living room doorway again, this time holding a dusty photo album. She had a small, pleading frown on her face, and for some reason, that specific expression struck me. How had I not noticed how desperately she was trying to connect? It wasn't just her loneliness. It was the way she moved, the quiet, deliberate way she tried to hold my attention. She seemed to be living in a world the rest of us had forgotten. I hadn't anticipated this job taking so long, and honestly, I was unsure how to handle her persistence. We hadn't talked much more since the initial ice water and sad stories, but something about her vulnerability resonated with me. Something about her pleading gaze made me feel pinned down. I tried to dismiss it as a one-off, just a lonely lady, until she looked right at me. "Cole," she murmured, her voice soft and inviting. It was the kind of voice that tries to make you feel like a confidant. I forced another smile, trying to steer things back to professional territory. "Hello, Eleanor. Almost got it licked here," she replied, saying she was just doing some cleaning, gesturing vaguely with the album. "Do you have a family?" A simple question. But it felt like a gateway to a conversation I didn't want to have. We talked about my job, the traffic, anything to fill the space. But underneath it all, there was that thrum of something else, a subtle but palpable tension. Little questions, lingering looks, and then unexpectedly she said, "Are you in a hurry to get anywhere after this?" She said it casually, as if it didn't matter, but I could feel she was holding her breath. I wasn't sure how to respond. I shrugged. Got a couple more stops before I can call it a day. She smiled faintly. Marcus is never coming back, you know. I was thinking of making some dinner. You should stay. It would be nice to have the company. That offer threw me completely. My gut reaction was to politely refuse. After all, what else was there to say? But the broken way she said it made it hard to be curt. Before I could stop myself, I heard my mouth forming a noncommittal, "I'll see how the time goes." And that was that. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. But later that afternoon, as I finally closed up the AC unit, my chest was tight with anxiety. I felt a buzz of unease I couldn't explain, like I was about to step through a door I couldn't reopen. When I stood up to leave, her house felt less like a home and more like a stage. The smell of something baking had started to fill the air, a scent that felt almost too deliberate, too welcoming. Eleanor was in the kitchen, humming quietly to herself as she pulled a small casserole from the oven. I stood in the hallway, just watching her for a moment. And that's when it hit me. This woman in front of me was not just lonely, she was adrift. She looked the same, but her actions felt more calculated now, more desperate. "Just a little something," she said, noticing me. "Dinner is just about ready." I stood by the counter, trying not to appear as unnerved as I felt. She moved around her kitchen with a practiced ease, as if this was a role she had played many times before. Meanwhile, I stood there trying to figure out how to make my exit. It wasn't just her sad eyes or how frail she seemed. It was how she was making me feel, as if I was more than just the guy who fixed her air conditioning. I was an answer to a problem I didn't want to solve. We didn't eat. I insisted I had to leave. There were no awkward silences, just my firm statements and her quiet pleas. She talked about her younger days, how she missed the thrill of having people over, the feeling of being needed. She confessed that, with Marcus gone, her life had settled into a flat, predictable routine. Her voice was brittle when she said it. It sounded like she'd been holding that feeling back for years, pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I listened. I didn't offer advice or easy platitudes. I just nodded and let her talk. Even as I stood there, tool bag in hand, I noticed things. The slight tremble in her hand, the way her laughter sounded forced. She wasn't just a client anymore. She was a woman unraveling. "Thank you," I said as I finally made a move for the front door. She looked at me, and for a split second I saw something truly desperate in her gaze. "I'm so glad you came," she said. "It's been so long since I've had a real conversation with anyone." I didn't know what to say, so I just gave a final nod, but I knew we were on two completely different pages. There was a gulf between us that I had no intention of crossing. When I reached for the doorknob, she stepped in front of me. The gesture was quick, almost casual, but her hand lingered on the deadbolt, and that single moment stayed with me. "Take care, Cole," she whispered, her voice almost a plea. My head was spinning as I started to turn the knob. That afternoon had seemed so routine, yet it had unraveled something inside me I couldn't name. She hadn't done anything overtly threatening, but the way she looked at me, the way she clung to the conversation, it made me feel like there was something wrong here, a different kind of danger. I had been in hundreds of houses, but this was not the same. And I hated how much I wanted to just bolt. I tried to push the feeling from my mind. I tried to act like this was normal. A few minutes later, I was explaining that I really had to leave, that my boss was expecting me to check in. I figured that would be the end of it, but as I reached for the door again, I saw Eleanor standing by the wall, watching me. She saw me looking, smiled faintly, and took a step forward. Without thinking, I quickened my pace. Her smile was fragile, but it had a possessiveness to it that hadn't been there before. Something unspoken made my stomach clench. "Cole," she said as I put my hand on the doorknob. "I didn't think you'd really leave." I shrugged, trying to be firm. "It was nice meeting you, Eleanor. Glad I could get the AC running." She laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Yes, you did. But I was hoping you'd stay for a bit longer. I'm not ready to be alone yet." Her gaze held mine for a second too long. And just like that, the air grew thick with tension. That cloying undercurrent that had been humming between us was now a blaring alarm. I should have pushed past her, should have just opened the door and walked out, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, frozen. We talked for another moment, me making excuses, her deflecting them. Then, at one point, she moved closer, leaving just inches between us. I hadn't planned on saying anything more, but the words just tumbled out. "Eleanor, I really have to go." She paused. Her smile vanished completely, and for a moment, I saw something raw and frightening in her eyes. "I know," she said quietly, "but I'm feeling a little scared to be by myself right now." Her honesty was a trap. It was as if she'd peeled back a final layer, revealing someone I hadn't expected, someone who was not just lonely, but deeply unstable. "I understand that," I answered, my voice steady, "but it's not always easy." She gave a slow nod, and we stood in silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was terrifying. I wanted to say something else, to create distance, to break the spell she was weaving, but the words wouldn't come. So I just looked at her, wondering if she was being genuine or if this was a manipulation. As I finally turned the knob, I heard it. The sharp, metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place behind me. My blood ran cold. The moment was over. Something inside me had snapped. That evening, my perception of Eleanor was sealed. She wasn't just a client. There was a dark and dangerous need radiating from her now. Later, when she finally let me leave after I promised to call my boss and tell him I was taking an early dinner break, I walked to my van, but my thoughts were stuck on that sound. What did she mean by scared? Was she just lonely, or was she softly threatening something more? As soon as I got in my van, I peeled out of the driveway and replayed the entire afternoon in my head. That dinner, that was a lure. That look in her eyes. It was then I realized this was not just some sad, lonely woman. There was something else happening with her, something broken. And whether I wanted to or not, I had been drawn into it. The scariest part? I wasn't sure if I could have resisted if she hadn't let me go. The following few days felt heavy. I couldn't stop thinking about that house, about Eleanor and her quiet desperation, her calm admission of fear, the way her gaze held mine as if she was searching for a lifeline. There was a weight in the air between us that I couldn't shake, no matter how hard I tried. I kept telling myself it meant nothing, that it was just a strange day at work. But I knew better. My job meant going into people's private spaces. But lately, even on routine calls, I found my mind drifting back. Back to her. Back to Eleanor. I hated that about myself. I hated the thoughts that refused to go away. Her smile, the way she moved through her silent house. She felt different now, like a ghost in my memory. That Saturday, I decided I needed to clear my head. I called a buddy and suggested we go to a sports bar, watch the game, like old times. Maybe if I surrounded myself with noise and people, I could drown out the memory. When I walked into the bar, the game was already on. My friend was waving me over to a table. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. About time. You're late, he joked, sliding a beer toward me. I forced a smile and said I got held up. We watched the game for the next hour, yelling at the screen, talking trash, and trying to forget the work week, but my mind wasn't in it. I was somewhere else entirely, somewhere quiet, dim, and unsettling. After a while, we took a break from the game. My friend asked unexpectedly, "You seem out of it, man. Everything okay?" He took a sip of his beer and looked at me. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You've just been quiet lately," he said, staring at the table. "Not your usual self. I don't know if you're stressed or what, but something feels off. I get that you deal with weird stuff, but are you good?" That hit harder than I anticipated. I'd always been able to compartmentalize, to leave work at the door. But maybe I was wrong. "I don't know," I said, keeping my voice low. "Did you talk to your boss about it?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not really. Every time I think about it, I just brush it off. I don't want to make a big deal out of it, but I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't right." I wasn't sure what else to say. A part of me wanted to tell him everything, to describe the look in her eyes, the click of the lock, the transformation from a lonely woman to something more predatory. But I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Maybe you just need some time off," he offered, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," I mumbled. "Maybe." But I could tell from the weight in his voice that he wasn't buying it. We finished our beers and I went home. My gut, however, remained tight the entire time, as if I was still heading towards something I couldn't stop. I walked through my own front door and there it was. Silence. But my silence was peaceful. Hers was a weapon. I thought of Eleanor sitting on her couch, flipping through a magazine. When I had finally left, she looked up, smiling as if everything was okay. "By Cole," she'd said cordially, but I could see it. The emptiness in her eyes, the rigid set of her shoulders. I realized she was playing a part, and I'd been cast without my permission. My heart was hammering louder than I wanted to admit. I went to the kitchen. I needed a second to breathe, to get away from the memory hanging in the room. But as I reached for a glass of water, I heard her voice in my head. "Cole," she'd said quietly, her voice calm yet direct. "Can we talk for a minute?" I had turned around, caught off guard. Yeah. Okay, what's up?" She had walked closer and softly shut the kitchen door. The space between us had narrowed, and I felt my chest tighten as she approached. I just wanted to thank you for listening," she had said, not quite meeting my gaze. "It meant a lot to me." I'd swallowed hard, her words hitting with an unexpected weight. "Of course," I'd replied. "You know, if you ever need someone to talk to, there are services." She'd nodded slowly, and for a moment neither of us spoke. We'd shared a dense, heavy quiet that buzzed with everything I wasn't saying. Then, almost as if to change the subject, she'd said, "Marcus is a good boy." You know, he's had his share of struggles, but he has a good heart. I nodded again, unsure where this was going, but her gaze had stayed on me for an extra second. The same desperate spark I'd felt earlier was back. It hummed between us like a wire stretched too tight. Yeah, I'd replied quietly. I'm sure he does. She'd smiled, but there was something else in that smile I couldn't place. I wondered if she was thinking what I was thinking, that this had gone too far. For a fleeting second, I considered asking her. I almost asked what was happening here, but I didn't. I just stood there, caught in the silence with her, wondering how to escape. Finally, she'd broken the moment with a quiet, "Thank you again, Cole." "Anytime," I had responded, but part of me knew I was lying. A week passed since that afternoon in her house. The experience wasn't spectacular or loud, but it had stayed with me. Every time my phone buzzed with an unknown number after that, the air felt different, electrified with dread. I couldn't tell if she would try to call, or if I was just projecting my own anxiety. Regardless, the memory of that day had shifted something in me, and I couldn't shake it. My buddy and I hung out as usual. He laughed, joked, and tried his best to keep my spirits up, but it didn't help. Every time a call came in from a new client, my gaze would linger on the address. I noted the small details, trying to reassure myself it wasn't her. It wasn't that neighborhood. It was small and barely noticeable to anyone else, but I saw it. I felt it. Then came Saturday. My boss had me on call, so I was at home waiting. It wasn't what I wanted, but I didn't mind. The truth is, I needed the quiet. I wanted space to process what was happening in my own head. I was sitting on the couch, thumbing through my phone when it rang. The display read, "Eleanor." I looked up, stunned, my heart beginning to race. Her voice came through the speaker, asking for me by name. "Cole?" My own voice was unreadable. "Hey," I managed, trying to sound professional, but my pulse was already a drum solo. I walked into my kitchen, paused for a bit, then asked, "Is everything okay with the AC?" That simple question caused my gut to clench. "Yes, of course," she said, her voice soft. "The AC is wonderful." We weren't touching, but the distance between us felt non-existent through the phone line. The air in my own apartment felt heavier. The room felt smaller. "I've been thinking about our recent conversation," she began, her voice cautious, "and I think I owe you an apology." I looked around my empty apartment, caught off guard. This was not where I expected this call to go. "I know I was a bit forward," she explained, saying she had been dealing with some things lately and didn't mean to put me on the spot. I blinked, trying to read her tone. "I mean, it's fine," I finally said. "You don't have to apologize." She chuckled at this, a sound that was warm on the surface, but something in it suggested she wasn't convinced. There was more she wasn't saying. "I appreciate that," she responded, "but I feel I may have crossed a line with you." My heart skipped a beat. This was the moment I had been dreading and, to be honest, expecting. I had no idea where this would lead, but I couldn't stop myself from hearing her out. "What do you mean?" I asked, my own voice softening, becoming more cautious. Eleanor took a deep breath on the other end of the line. "I think you know," she added gently. "There was something there, in that room, and I can't keep pretending it didn't happen." I froze. Her words hit me squarely in the chest, harder than I had expected. Of course, I had felt it, but hearing her say it aloud made it feel more real, more tangible, and more dangerous. "I'm not trying to make things awkward, Cole," she said, her voice just above a whisper. "I'm just not sure how to handle this feeling, but I can't keep pretending I'm not lonely." I glanced around my apartment, my mind racing in a dozen different directions. Everything inside of me was screaming that this was wrong, that I shouldn't be on this call. And yet, there I was. "I don't want it to be weird either," I said, trying to remain calm and keep the whole situation from unraveling. "But I honestly don't know what you want me to say." She was quiet for a long time, her silence direct and steady. The stillness was dense, loaded with everything she couldn't say aloud. Then she spoke again. Her voice was soft and barely noticeable, but it was electric. It sent a chill through me. My breath caught, and for a few seconds I couldn't move. "This isn't just about the AC, Cole," she whispered, her voice full of meaning. "I'm not sure what this is, but I can't ignore it anymore, and I don't want to." A surge of emotion washed over me all at once. Pity, revulsion, curiosity, fear. I was aware of the risks. I knew what could happen if anyone misinterpreted this, but I also knew I had to end this connection. And a part of me didn't want it to continue. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice wavering. "I mean, about calling me again?" She simply said, "I am." And with that, the line we'd been carefully dancing around was erased. We said nothing more. There was nothing left to say. But the air had changed. I felt the shift, the weight of what she had just admitted. Everything changed after that. I blocked her number. It's been 1 year since that day. I made a choice to build a wall for a year of balancing my job with the quiet fear I had to set aside. In some ways, it feels like I've lived an entire lifetime in the shadow of that one stolen afternoon. We didn't speak again. What began the day I fixed her AC and she locked the door hadn't vanished. It had just become a part of my past. It felt strangely formative. But it was also fragile, something I kept locked away very close. I made one decision from the beginning. My safety mattered. And that safety stemmed from boundaries, a kind of boundary that allows me to do my job while protecting myself from the world's deep loneliness. I had created my own safe space, my own little fortress against anything too real, but the unease never really left me. Every time I get a call for a single woman living alone, something pinches at the back of my mind. Not because I believe they are all like her, but carrying a memory like this always leaves a mark. Nevertheless, I never second-guessed my choice to block her. I made it for me. And no matter how busy or stressful things became, it always felt right. I still see houses like hers whenever I'm on a job, quiet and well kept. I never crossed that line again. I kept everything professional, quiet, and at arm's length. The hardest part was pretending. My boss would ask how a job went, and I'd smile as if nothing happened. I kept my hands to myself and my stories generic, acting as if I was nothing more than a friendly technician. But those small moments, the quick assessment of a new client, the polite but firm refusal of a drink, the brief touch of a hand on a doorknob to make sure it wasn't locked, they became everything. Those were what kept me safe. When I was alone in my apartment, I'd think about what could have happened if the truth of that day was different. I never had a clear what if, just hazy possibilities and half-formed fears. But I didn't linger on it for very long. I remained in the present, in the quiet, in-between spaces where I didn't have to explain myself to anyone, where I could simply be. It was a quiet Tuesday evening, roughly a year after it began. I was back at my own place, sitting on the couch, the same place where her call had found me. The place remained tranquil. I was off the clock, so I had the home to myself again. Everything felt normal now, comfortable in a way that had once been threatened. I'd learned how to live like this, quiet, careful, and disconnected. I didn't have to constantly process my feelings about it anymore. The memory had settled into something stable, something distant. It had always been unorthodox, but it became something I couldn't imagine forgetting. I sat there, looking around my own living room, which felt as safe as ever. There was a softness to my own life now, an ease in my body and a serenity on my face. It had taken time, but I had learned to bear the weight of what I'd experienced. I had grown around the secret. I found peace in it. I figured out how to make my own space feel like home again. Do you ever think about how you got here? I asked myself quietly, my tone warm and low, breaking the silence. I grinned and leaned back, sinking into the cushions. All the time, I answered. Honestly, I still can't believe it's been a year. I looked around the room, my old fear changing into something resembling thankfulness. It doesn't feel like a year. I gave a quiet laugh and rested my head back. It doesn't, right? I muttered. But at the same time, it seems like this has always been my reality, as if this was supposed to happen. I slowly nodded, resting my hand on my own knee. Yeah, it's weird, I said. But it's the good kind of weird. I never anticipated my job would be like this, but now that I'm here, I wouldn't change how I handled it. I tilted my head, meeting my own gaze in the dark TV screen with that same look of resolve that always seemed to make the world steady again. I responded gently, Me neither. Given the circumstances, I think I did admirably. I'm glad I kept it to myself. My voice was firm and sure. It is mine. It's just mine. And I was right. That was the most important part. It wasn't about anyone else. This was something I navigated quietly, painstakingly, and alone. I'm glad, I replied softly, giving my knee a tiny pat. I'm safe. That is what counts. I did not think much more after that. I didn't have to. I just sat there, by myself, enveloped in a silence that didn't require filling. The only sound was the quiet ticking of the clock on the wall. A year had passed. A whole year spent looking over my shoulder. I somehow made it work. I kept the secret. I protected what I had. And through it all, I held on to what was most important. Myself. As the evening progressed and the sky outside darkened, one thought became clear in my mind. This is how I wanted things to stay. It was not ideal. It was messy, odd, and difficult.